In 1980s Poland, a shopper might wait 3 days in line just for a single roll of toilet paper. Grocery stores were often so empty that the only things sitting on the shelves were bottles of vinegar and vodka. This was the reality of a country where food was treated as fuel for workers rather than a joy. Today we explore the strange world of communist eating, from luxury to fuel. Before the communist era began, the people of Poland enjoyed a very rich diet. They ate things like freshwater crayfish, tender veal, and wild game from the deep forests. They even had fancy cheeses and chestnuts from other countries. But after World War II, everything changed. The new government had a very different idea about what people should eat. They believed that food should not be about pleasure or fancy tastes. Instead, they said food was just fuel. It was like gas for a car. You needed it to work in the factories and build the new socialist state. The government started to control almost all the food in the country. They took over the farms and the factories that made bread and meat. They wanted everyone to eat the same simple things. This meant that the variety of food started to disappear. Instead of many different types of fish or meat, people were told to eat potatoes, grains, and dairy. If you were a worker, the state wanted you to have enough calories to do your job, but they did not care if your meal was boring. This was the beginning of a time when the kitchen became a place of survival rather than a place of art. The secret of the milk bar. If you walk through a Polish city during this time, you would see a very special kind of cafeteria called a milk bar. These places were everywhere. The government paid for most of the cost so that the food was very cheap for the workers. But these were not like the restaurants you see today. Inside, the air was thick with a smell of fried cabbage and sour milk. The floors were often gray and cold. You would pick up a heavy tray and wait in a line to get your meal from a small window. The workers in these milk bars were usually women wearing white aprons and head caps. They were not there to be friendly or give good service. Their job was just to get the food onto the plates as fast as possible. Have you ever seen a spoon chained to a table? In some of the poorest milk bars, the aluminum spoons were actually attached to the tables with long metal chains. This was because things were so scarce that the government was afraid people would steal the cutlery. The plates were often thick white ceramic with blue rims. You would sit at a long table with people you did not know. A professor might sit right next to a coal miner. Everyone was equal in the milk bar because everyone was eating the same flour dumplings or tomato soup. Shelves of vinegar. As the years went on, the economy started to struggle. This is when the famous empty shelves appeared. If you went to a grocery store in the 1980s, you would often see nothing but row after row of vinegar bottles. Sometimes there was also a lot of vodka. The government kept the vodka plentiful because it was a way to make money and keep people quiet. But where was the meat? Where was the butter? These things were almost impossible to find in a normal shop. The shops were very dark and quiet. There was no music playing and no colorful advertisements. The shopkeepers were often bored and would just lean against the empty counters. When a delivery truck did arrive, the news spread like lightning through the neighborhood. People would drop what they were doing and run to the store. They did not even ask what was inside the truck. It did not matter. If the store was selling something, you bought it. You could always trade it later for something you actually needed. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to shop without knowing if there would be any food at all? The power of the paper ticket. Because there was not enough food for everyone, the government introduced a system of ration cards. These were little books of paper stamps. Every month, each person was given a certain number of stamps for things like meat, sugar, flour, and butter. You could not just walk in and buy a steak even if you had the money. You had to have the right stamp. Different people got different amounts. Manual workers who did hard physical labor got more meat than people who worked in offices. Children and pregnant women got more milk and sugar. But here's the strange part. Having a stamp did not mean you would actually get the food. It only gave you the legal right to buy it if the shop had it. Many people would walk away from a store with their stamps still in their pockets because the meat was all gone. The meat was very precious. A single kilogram of pork was like gold. People would save their meat stamps for weeks just to have one nice meal on a Sunday. This system made life very stressful. Every day was a race to use your stamps before the food ran out. Standing in line for days. This led to the most famous part of life in communist Poland, which was the queue. People spent a huge part of their lives just standing in line. It was not just a few minutes of waiting. These lines could last for hours or even days. If a store was expected to get a shipment of washing machines or furniture, the line might start 2 days early. People would organize themselves into queue committees. They would write down everyone's name on a list and check it every few hours to make sure nobody was cutting in. And families had to work together to survive the lines. A child might stand in line for an hour before school. Then the grandmother would take over while the parents were at work. When the father came home, he would go and stand in the line through the night. They would bring stools to sit on and blankets to stay warm. Can you believe that people would wait for 20 hours just to buy some basic butter or a few eggs? The line became a social place where people talked and shared rumors about where the next delivery might be. It was also where they complained about the government, but they had to be careful who was listening. The taste of fake chocolate children during this time did not have the sweets we have today. Real chocolate was very hard to find because the ingredients like cocoa had to be bought from other countries with money the government did not have. So they created something called chocolate-like products. These looked like chocolate bars, but they were made mostly of vegetable fat and sugar. They had a very waxy texture and did not melt in your mouth. They tasted a bit like cocoa, but they were definitely not the real thing. Adults also had to find ways to fake their favorite treats. Real coffee was a luxury that most people only saw once a year. Instead, they drank something called Inca. This was a drink made from roasted grains like rye and barley. It looked like coffee and was hot, but it did not have any caffeine. People also made olives out of pickled plums and tea out of dried flowers from the fields. It was a time of great creativity. If you could not buy what you wanted, you had to figure out how to make something that looked and tasted just a little bit like it. The Secret Food Network. If the stores were empty, how did people stay healthy? The answer was the black market and the secret network of farmers. Many people in the cities still had family members living in the countryside. These relatives would raise pigs or cows in secret. They would hide the meat from the government inspectors and bring it into the city. There was a famous figure called the veal lady. She was a woman who would walk through apartment buildings with a large bag hidden under her coat. Inside the bag were cuts of meat and fresh eggs. She would knock on the doors of people she trusted and sell the food for high prices or trade it for things like clothes or tools. This was illegal, but almost everyone did it. Even the police and the government officials bought meat this way. Another important part of the economy was barter. A bottle of vodka was often more valuable than money. You could give a bottle of vodka to a plumber to fix your sink, or to a butcher to get a better piece of meat from the back of the shop. People learned that to survive, you needed to have friends and connections. It was not about what you knew, but who you knew. Christmas and the bathtub fish. The most important meal of the year was always Christmas Eve. The government knew that if there was no food for Christmas, the people might start a revolution. So every December they would make a huge effort to bring in special treats. This was the only time of year many children ever saw an orange or a banana. These fruits usually came from Cuba, because Cuba was also a communist country. The oranges were often green and very sour, but to a Polish child who had not seen fruit in months, they were the best thing in the world. There was also the tradition of the Christmas carp. Because there was no refrigeration in the shops, the government would sell the fish while they were still alive. You would buy a live carp and carry it home in a bucket or a plastic bag. Then, you would put the fish in your bathtub. For 2 or 3 days before Christmas, you could not take a bath because a large fish was swimming in there. The children would name the fish and watch it swim, which made it very sad when it was time to cook it for dinner. but this was the only way to make sure the fish was fresh for the big meal. The legacy of the empty plate. When the communist system finally fell in 1989, things changed very quickly. Suddenly, the shops were filled with colorful boxes and fruits from all over the world. People could finally buy whatever they wanted without a ration card. But the habits of the old days did not go away immediately. Even today, older people in Poland hate to see food go to waste. They still remember what it was felt like to have nothing. The simple dishes from the milk bars, like pierogi and tomato soup, are still the most popular comfort foods in the country. The story of what people ate in communist Poland is a story of how a nation survived. It shows that even when life is very hard and the shelves are empty, people will find a way to feed their families. They will stand in line for days, they will keep fish in their bathtubs, and they will make coffee out of grain. Today, Poland has some of the best food in Europe, but the memory of the vinegar-filled shops is still an important part of its history. It is strange to think that just 40 years ago, a piece of chocolate was a rare treasure. Looking back helps us understand why the people of Poland value their food and their freedom so much today. The kitchen is no longer a place of fuel and survival, but the stories from those difficult times will never be forgotten.